Okay, we are starting Module 2, and we're looking at Lesson 1 today, and it's entitled, Why Move Things Around? So what we're really going to be focusing on today and looking at your I can statements, it says, I can use transparencies, which if you don't know what that is, that's just a see-through piece of paper, basically, or paper, to imitate a rigid motion that moves one figure to another. So let's look at your note sheet, and problem number 1 right there on the front says to describe intuitively what kind of transformation will be required to move the figure on the left to each of the figures 1 through 3. To help with this exercise, use a transparency to copy the figure on the left. Note that you are supposed to begin by moving the left figure to each of the locations in 1, 2, and 3. So you also have a piece of computer paper with you, so what I want you to start by doing is to draw this shape that's over on the far left. Just trace that over onto your blank piece of computer paper. And we're going to use that to help us figure out how to get to shape 1, shape 2, and shape 3. Now, if you look, I can just take my image and I can highlight it. And if I look at, take this shape, and I want to try to get to image 1 over here. Now let's figure out what I need to do. Well, it's the exact same shape, it's facing the same direction, so all I would need to do is just slide it right over there and it would lay right on top. So for down at the bottom, in that empty space, we are going to write that we would slide to get to number 1. That's all we have to do for that one. Now, how do we get to number 2? Because if you notice, it's facing a different direction. So if you would just slide your computer paper over, they don't line up and they don't match perfectly. But notice that what I could do is once I slide it to line up, I would then have to flip the image upside down in order to get the shape that is there. So I can go here and go to flip just to show you that when you flip it, it does actually become the same shape. So we've discovered that, and we will write this down at the bottom. To get to image 2, we would first need to slide to get to image 2. But then we would need to flip so that they coincide. And coincide just means that they would be matching up perfectly. Now, if we come back, and I'm going to put my shape back to the way it was, and I'm going to move it back over here. The last thing we need to do is get to image number 3. So, first thing we're going to have to do, just like all the others, is we're going to have to slide it over here. Now, the next thing I'm going to have to do, you can see all I would need to do would be to rotate, and mine's not rotating perfectly because it won't stay, but if you take your transparency and you were to, or your piece of computer paper, and slide it over, all you would have to do would be to rotate or turn your computer paper to the left and it would match up perfectly with image number 3. So for my description down at the bottom, I'm going to add in that we would need to slide to 3, then turn it so that they coincide. Again, so that they match up perfectly. Now I'm going to have you add in a couple of vocabulary terms here at the bottom because we're going to give proper terms for slide, flip, and turn, and there are probably words that you already know. So the first one is translate, and that means to slide. The second one is to reflect, and that means you are going to flip the object. And then the third one is to rotate, and that just means that you are going to turn. So I know we've talked about those in previous years, so you should probably already be familiar with those three terms. Okay, so that finishes up number 1. So if we flip over to the back at number 2, it says that given two segments, AB and CD, which could be very far apart, how can we find out if they have the same length without measuring them individually? Do you think they have the same length? How would you check? In other words, why do you think we need to move things around on the plane? So let's just take this one question at a time. How could we find out if they are the same length without actually measuring them? So we're going to use the tool that we talked about on number 1, and that is the transparency or the piece of computer paper. So all you would have to do is trace the segment onto a transparency. And again, you could think of that as just a regular piece of paper also. And once we have it traced, we would slide it so it lines up with the other segment. And then if they are the exact same, then they're the same length. If not, then they're different lengths. Now, for these two, do you think they have the same length? Now, so without measuring, you can just look and make your own inference on if you think they would be the same length. So then let's move on. Why do you think we need to move things around in a plane? So what we're going to look at there and say is we move things around to see if they are exactly the same. This way we don't have to measure. So this whole lesson was just about tracing a line or a shape of some kind onto another piece of paper and sliding it, flipping it, rotating it to figure out how to match up with another object.